Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the immaculate drawing room of the Whitmore residence, everything gleamed with luxury: crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, and carefully arranged antique furniture. The new nanny, Emily Carter, a discreet and shy young woman, had barely finished feeding the youngest child when Mrs. Victoria Whitmore entered, her figure perfectly straight, her eyes piercing behind her designer glasses. "Spilled your bottle again?" Victoria snapped, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "Really, Emily, how do you expect to keep a job here with such clumsiness?" Emily lowered her eyes, red with shame, while the children watched, confused and worried. The other servants remained silent, afraid of making a mistake. The air seemed to thicken with an unbearable weight, heavy with judgment and contempt. Then, in an almost palpable silence, Mr. Jonathan Whitmore entered the room. His gaze swept the scene, and everyone awaited the usual reaction of a husband faithful to his wife. But what he did froze the entire room. Jonathan slowly approached Emily, placed a firm but calm hand on her shoulder, and said in a deep voice, full of authority and compassion, "Victoria, that's enough." A murmur rippled through the room. The servants exchanged surprised glances. Victoria, shocked, stiffened, unable to utter a word. Jonathan turned to Emily, his gaze softening the young woman's features. "Emily, you have my trust here. Ignore the unfair criticism." A heavy silence fell. The nanny, her eyes brimming with tears, felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The children, fascinated, watched their father with new eyes. And Victoria, she suddenly understood that her authority in this house had just crumbled. That evening, in that sumptuous living room, the invisible hierarchy had just changed, and no one would forget the reaction of a husband who dared to defend the one whom everyone considered insignificant. Emily Carter was nervous. For weeks she had dreamed of working for a prestigious family, and now that she was finally crossing the threshold of the Whitmore's home, her heart was pounding. The family's children, 5-year-old twins and a 1-year-old baby, watched her curiously. She forced herself to smile and hide her nervousness. Her first task was simple: prepare the baby's bottle. But in her haste, the warm liquid spilled slightly onto the solid wood table. Before she could even react, Victoria Whitmore entered the room, her heels clicking like a verdict. "What is this?" Victoria thundered, her face frozen in contempt. "You're supposed to be competent, Emily. Look at this mess." Emily lowered her head in shame as the baby cried, confused by the cold tone of the lady of the house. She murmured, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it up right away." But Victoria wasn't finished yet. "Sorry," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls decorated with antique paintings. "Your sorry doesn't pay the bills for this house." Silence fell for a moment. The servants stood perfectly still, unable to move, and the twins huddled together. Emily felt tears welling up, but before they could fall, the door opened again. Mr. Jonathan Whitmore entered, looking calm but stern. He observed the scene, then simply said, "Victoria, that's enough." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Emily, surprised, looked up. Jonathan's gaze was protective, reassuring. "Emily," he continued, "I hired you for your competence and your kindness. Don't let anyone intimidate you here." Victoria, red with anger, took a step back. No one in this house had ever dared to contradict her, and she was unsettled. Emily, on the other hand, felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since her arrival, she felt accepted. As Jonathan left the room, Emily whispered to the children, "Don't worry. I'm fine." And in that luxurious living room, something had just changed. Emily understood that she was no longer simply a nanny. She had just entered a world where courage and loyalty could change everything. The next morning, Emily got up before dawn. The house still seemed asleep, but the still luxury around her reminded her that she was no longer in her modest little apartment. She had learned an important lesson: in this house, appearances and discipline mattered as much as the heart. The twins, Lucy and Ethan, were already running down the hall, excited about the prospect of a new day. Emily smiled as she watched them, happy to sense their growing confidence. She decided to prepare a special breakfast for them, hoping to bring some joy back after the humiliation of the previous day. But as always, Victoria observed everything. Sitting in her armchair, a cup of coffee in her hand, she didn't miss a single movement of the nanny. "You put too much syrup on the pancakes, Emily." "It's a disaster," she said icily. Emily gritted her teeth. She had learned not to respond anymore, but this gratuitous criticism still stung. She lowered her head and murmured, "I'll fix that immediately." The children, however, intervened. "Mom, stop. Emily is doing this for us, not for you." Victoria froze, her eyes flashing. Never before had she been contradicted by these little beings. But before she could reply, Jonathan entered, like a protective presence imposing a wordless silence. "Victoria," he said calmly, but with an authority that cut short all protests. Emily did her best. "If you have a problem, you deal with me, not her." Victoria clenched her fists, red with anger, but no words came out. Emily felt her heart beat faster. For the first time, she understood that her position in this house was no longer precarious. Jonathan had just erected an invisible barrier between her and his wife's abuse. After Victoria left, Jonathan leaned towards Emily. "I know it's not easy. But I chose you for your honesty and courage. Never forget that." Emily nodded, moved and grateful. She understood that her real battle in this house would not only be against accidents or mistakes, but against the cruelty and arrogance of a woman who had never accepted that an outsider could have her place. This day, which could have been a simple series of chores, became a symbol for Emily. She was no longer just the new nanny. She was someone who, little by little, would gain respect and dignity, even in the face of the coldest adversity. A few days had passed since the bottle incident. Emily was beginning to settle into the Whitmore household. The twins, Lucy and Ethan, already adored her, and even the baby, William, seemed calmer in her presence. But Victoria constantly scrutinized her every move, ready to pounce on the slightest mistake. One morning, while Emily was preparing lunch, she heard Victoria whisper to a maid, "I don't know how Jonathan could have chosen her. She's clumsy and inexperienced." Emily felt a mixture of anger and sadness, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew that the best response would not be confrontation, but proving her worth. It was that afternoon that her chance arrived. Jonathan had invited colleagues for a private meeting in the living room, and he had asked Emily to keep an eye on the children so they wouldn't disturb the meeting. But no sooner had she started playing with them than Lucy accidentally knocked over an antique vase, a family heirloom. Time seemed to stand still. Emily took a deep breath, then, with surprising speed and precision, she gathered the pieces, cleaned the floor, and secured the area before anyone entered. The vase was beyond repair, but none of the guests had noticed the accident. Jonathan entered at that moment and observed the scene. He was impressed by the way Emily had handled the situation, without panicking and with remarkable composure. "Emily," he said softly, "you have a gift for keeping your composure in chaos. That's exactly what I needed here." Victoria, who had discreetly followed Jonathan, frowned. The pride she expected from her husband turned to irritation. She tried to downplay Emily's achievement. It was just a stroke of luck. Even a child could have done it. But Jonathan, for the first time, stared at Victoria with unexpected coldness. "No, Victoria. It wasn't a stroke of luck." Emily showed competence and composure. "I advise you to learn to recognize that." Victoria looked away, unable to reply. Emily felt a thrill of inner triumph. For the first time, she realized that her place in this house would depend not only on surviving the criticism, but also on her actions and her determination. Later, when she joined the children in the garden, Lucy and Ethan jumped onto her lap. "Emily, you are our hero," exclaimed Ethan. Emily smiled, touched by their innocence and admiration. She understood that her real battle wasn't just against Victoria, but also against the prejudice and arrogance in this house. And for the first time, she felt she had the power to change the dynamics of this family, one step at a time. In the days that followed, Emily settled gently into her routine. The twins laughed and played fearlessly beside her, and even William, the baby, now seemed to fall peacefully asleep in her arms. Jonathan continued to support her discreetly, sending her encouraging signs at every opportunity. But all was not yet peaceful. Victoria, offended and humiliated by her husband's gratitude towards Emily, began to plot her own schemes. One morning, Victoria summoned Emily to the family study under the pretext of giving her instructions for organizing a private party the family was to host. The room, adorned with antique furniture and imposing portraits, was filled with an intimidating atmosphere. "Emily," Victoria began, her tone icy, "I'm going to give you a simple task, well, as simple as someone of your caliber can handle." Emily felt her stomach clench, but she smiled politely. "Of course, madam. I will do my best." Victoria gave a fake, almost cruel smile. "I hope so. It involves setting the table for about 30 people, with impeccable arrangement. And attention to every detail. Even a crooked plate could cost you dearly." Emily nodded, aware that Victoria was trying to trap her. However, she had learned not to be intimidated anymore. She spent the day meticulously planning every detail, measuring the distances between the plates, checking the glasses and cutlery, and organizing a perfect service. When Jonathan entered to check on the progress of the preparations, he was impressed. "Emily, that's remarkable. You've transformed this table into a true masterpiece." Victoria, witnessing the scene, felt her anger rising. Her attempt at discrediting her had failed. She clenched her fists and murmured, "You don't know what you're doing." But Jonathan, this time more resolute than ever, replied, "I know exactly what I'm doing, Victoria. Emily is competent. She deserves our trust." Victoria left the room without a word, but her eyes flashed. She understood that her husband's support for Emily was not superficial and that his position of control in the house was beginning to waver. Emily, for her part, felt the tension but also a strange sense of pride. For the first time, she understood that her perseverance and patience could truly change the dynamics of this house. She promised herself she would continue to demonstrate courage and competence, knowing that the real challenge was only just beginning. As evening fell, and the children drifted peacefully off to sleep, Emily murmured to herself, "No matter what Victoria does, I will not let fear dictate my life here." And in the silence of the grand Whitmore house, a new feeling was taking hold. Emily was no longer just a nanny. She was becoming a quiet force, ready to face the storms of this luxurious but ruthless house. A few weeks had passed since Victoria had tried to trick Emily with the table setting. The nanny had gained Jonathan and the children's trust, but Victoria, hurt and jealous, couldn't accept losing her hold on the household. That day, she decided to confront Emily directly. Emily was cleaning the living room while the twins played quietly beside her. Victoria entered, her heels clicking on the parquet floor with almost menacing precision. "Emily," she began, her tone as sharp as a knife, "I think it's time we had a talk." Emily sat up, her heart pounding, but remained calm. "Of course, madam. I'm listening." Victoria stepped forward, her eyes sparkling with suppressed anger. "Do you really think you can walk around this house as if you own it? Do you think Jonathan will always protect you?" Emily took a deep breath. She knew that any emotional reaction could work against her. "I don't claim to be the mistress, ma'am. I'm simply doing my job as best I can." Victoria moved closer, lowering her voice so that only she and Emily could hear. "You'll see what it costs to challenge me." At that precise moment, Jonathan entered the living room, interrupting the confrontation. His gaze swept the room, then settled on his wife and Emily. "Victoria, stop immediately." Her voice, firm but calm, resonated like a hammer on steel. "Emily is doing her job properly. Your anger is unjustified and unacceptable. If you continue to harass her, I will take the necessary measures." Victoria, surprised by her husband's sudden and uncompromising authority, froze. She was no longer the sole dominant figure here. Jonathan had just erected a clear and definitive barrier. Emily, although slightly trembling, felt a surge of courage and gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she murmured. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have shown courage and competence, Emily. That's exactly what this house needed." Victoria, unable to reply and aware that her plan had failed, stepped back and left the room with a slam of the door. The children, fascinated, watched their father with new eyes, admiring the courage and righteousness of his actions. That day, Emily understood something crucial: in this house, fear and manipulation would not prevail. As long as she remained honest, competent, and courageous, she could not only survive, but also transform the power dynamics around her. As evening fell, Emily sat down beside the children and whispered, "No matter what happens, we will remain strong." And in the hushed silence of the great Whitmore house, a new era seemed to begin, an era where dignity and respect could finally triumph over arrogance and cruelty. Despite the public humiliation she had suffered, Victoria Whitmore hadn't given up. She understood that attacking Emily head-on wouldn't work and that her husband would always support the nanny if she persisted in her provocations. So, she decided to adopt a more subtle, more insidious strategy. That morning, Emily was preparing breakfast for the twins and William. Sunlight filtered through the silk curtains, illuminating the still quiet living room. Emily was carefully arranging the fruit and cereal when Victoria entered discreetly, a calculating smile on her face. "Emily," she said in a soft but sharp voice, "I thought it would be fun to change things up a bit." Emily looked up, suspicious. "What do you mean, madam?" Victoria handed him a packet of imported biscuits, pretending they were for children. "Just a small addition to make breakfast more enjoyable." Emily cautiously agreed. But no sooner were the cookies on the table than the children began coughing and grimacing. Panic erupted instantly. Emily quickly removed the cookies, checking their ingredients. Fortunately, nothing dangerous was found, but the small incident had been enough to sow doubt and confusion. Jonathan entered at that moment and observed the scene. His eyes rested on the children, then on Emily. "What is happening here?" he asked calmly but authoritatively. Emily quickly explained the situation, subtly mentioning Victoria's presence and how she had insisted on improving breakfast. Jonathan frowned, realizing his wife was once again trying to get Emily into trouble. "Victoria," he said firmly, "I have already asked you to cease all interference in Emily's responsibilities. If you continue, you will understand that I am serious." Victoria, red with anger but unable to reply, simply looked away. Emily felt a mixture of relief and tension. She had narrowly escaped a trap. Later that day, Emily took some time to reflect. She realized that Victoria would stop at nothing, and that every action had to be anticipated. It was no longer just about doing her job well, but about protecting the children and her position in this luxurious but dangerous house. Emily murmured to herself, "Victoria is playing a dangerous game, but I won't be intimidated. I have to be smarter than her." And in that silent living room, the battle of subtlety and cunning had just begun. Emily understood that the real challenge was not surviving a workday, but navigating a world where intelligence and courage might be the only weapons against cruelty. After the cookie incident, Emily realized that caution alone wouldn't be enough. Victoria wasn't going to stop at simple humiliations. She was looking to destabilize Emily at every opportunity, to sow doubt and fear. Emily decided it was time to take action, but in a smart and subtle way. The following morning, she observed Victoria from a distance. The woman of the house seemed to be meticulously planning every move, seeking to catch Emily off guard and create a mistake. Emily mentally noted every habit, every tick, every moment Victoria tried to interfere with her responsibilities. When Victoria tried another tactic by claiming William's room wasn't tidy, Emily remained calm. She knew Victoria wanted to provoke a conflict to elicit an emotional reaction. So, instead of defending herself, Emily responded politely and logically. "I will make sure everything is perfect, madam." But if you wish, I can show you how I proceed so that we are on the same page. Victoria, surprised by this calm and non-confrontational response, stepped back slightly. No one had ever put her in her place without a direct confrontation. The children, witnessing this interaction, began to watch Emily with silent admiration. In the days that followed, Emily used her cunning more strategically. She anticipated traps, secured areas where Victoria might cause trouble, and performed flawlessly in every task. Jonathan, impressed by her determination and intelligence, began to entrust her with greater responsibilities, such as managing logistics for family events and monitoring the children's files. One evening, as she was preparing the rooms for the night, Emily whispered to Lucy and Ethan. "You know, sometimes people try to bring us down, but if we stay calm and smart, we can overcome them." The children nodded, gradually understanding that their nanny was not only a sweet and caring person, but also a quiet force capable of protecting their little world. Victoria, for her part, began to feel her hold weakening. She realized that Emily was not only resilient, but also capable of anticipating her maneuvers and neutralizing them. This realization angered her, but also left her vulnerable. The more she tried to manipulate her, the stronger Emily appeared in the eyes of Jonathan and the children. That evening, Emily sat alone in the quiet living room, reflecting on the battle that still awaited her. She knew Victoria wouldn't give up, but for the first time, she felt ready to face every challenge with courage and intelligence. "Every action counts," she murmured, "and I will not let anyone destroy what we have built here." And in that large house, under the glittering chandeliers, Emily sensed that a profound change was underway. She was no longer the shy new nanny, but an indispensable and respected ally. Emily knew Victoria would never back down on her own. Every victory the nanny achieved was seen as a humiliation by the lady of the house, and each day brought its share of tension. To protect her job and, above all, the children, Emily decided it was time to adopt a bolder strategy. She began by carefully observing Victoria's movements. The woman always seemed to be trying to assert her authority during meals or family activities. Emily noted every moment Victoria interfered with her tasks, every sly remark she made to the servants and children, and every gesture designed to sow doubt. One evening, Emily discreetly asked Jonathan if he could accompany her to check the preparations for an important dinner for distinguished guests. Curious, Jonathan agreed. Emily used this opportunity to put a subtle plan into action. She ensured that every room was immaculate and everything was ready in advance, leaving little room for criticism or interference from Victoria. On the day of the dinner, Victoria tried, as expected, to take control. She began rearranging the cutlery and criticizing the arrangement of the glasses. But each time she tried, Emily, calm and polite, explained the logic behind her choices, confidently demonstrating that everything was fine. Jonathan, witnessing this interaction, supported Emily with a simple glance or a slight nod. Frustrated and unable to find a way to break through, Victoria felt her authority crumble even further. The servants, who had previously trembled at the mere sight of Victoria, began to look at Emily with respect and admiration. Even the children, silent witnesses to this struggle, understood that their nanny was much more than just a presence. After dinner, Jonathan turned to Emily. "You did a remarkable job. Your preparation and composure prevented any unnecessary confrontation." Emily smiled, feeling for the first time that she had truly gained the upper hand in this silent battle. "Thank you, sir. I only want the best for the children and for this house." Victoria, meanwhile, isolated herself in her office, furious and unable to protest. She finally realized that Emily wasn't just competent, she was strategic and determined. Every attempt at sabotage had been thwarted, and her own influence over the house was diminishing every day. That evening, Emily sat with the children, reading a story to Lucy, Ethan, and William. She knew that the real victory was not winning a confrontation, but securing a safe and harmonious environment for them. Sometimes, Emily whispered to the children, "You have to be clever to protect those you love. But with courage and patience, you can overcome any obstacle." And in the soothing silence of the Whitmore house, Emily understood that she had taken a crucial step. She was no longer simply the nanny, but a pillar of security and respect in this home. Victoria Whitmore had never been one to give up. Every attempt to intimidate or humiliate Emily had failed, and her position in the house was visibly weakening. Humiliated and furious, she decided to attempt one last desperate move, a plan she believed to be foolproof. One morning, while Emily was getting the children ready for school, Victoria entered the kitchen with a falsely conciliatory air. "Emily," she said, "I'd like you to supervise a very important project for me today." Emily frowned slightly, suspicious. "Of course, madam. What is it?" Victoria handed her a to-do list for organizing a reception for influential guests from the city. But in reality, every detail of this list was designed to trap Emily: poorly worded invitations, impossible orders to fulfill, and complex arrangements that no one could pull off without making a mistake. Emily calmly took the list and read it carefully. She immediately understood that Victoria was trying to provoke a public failure, one that would have destroyed her reputation in the eyes of Jonathan and the guests. But Emily had learned to anticipate traps and turn challenges into opportunities. She took a deep breath and began to organize every detail, subtly correcting Victoria's intentional mistakes without ever openly contradicting her. She used her organizational skills, creativity, and composure to prepare a flawless event. The servants, inspired by her mastery, followed her instructions efficiently. When Jonathan arrived to oversee the reception, he was impressed. Everything was impeccable. The guests praised the elegance and precision of the organization, completely unaware of the subtle traps Victoria had set. Victoria, observing the scene, felt her plan fail spectacularly. Her attempt to discredit Emily had not only failed, but it had only strengthened everyone's admiration for the young nanny. Jonathan, noticing his wife's furious look, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you did an exceptional job. You deserve our full trust." Emily smiled, but inside she knew the battle wasn't completely over yet. Victoria was still there, still ready to manipulate and humiliate, but now Emily had a powerful weapon: her skill, her cunning, and the trust of Jonathan and the children. Later, while reading a story to the twins and William, Emily whispered, "Even when someone tries to bring us down, all we have to do is stay calm and smart, and never lose sight of what's important." In this luxurious and tense household, Emily had transformed every obstacle into a silent victory. She was no longer just the shy nanny who had arrived a few weeks earlier; she had become a respected and indispensable force. A few weeks after Victoria's final blow, the Whitmore household began to breathe a new life. Emily, now confident and respected, continued to care for the children with gentleness and quiet authority. Lucy, Ethan, and William thrived under her watchful eye, and Jonathan subtly offered his support, allowing Emily to lead where it was important for her to take the initiative. Victoria, however, still hadn't accepted her defeat. Her arrogance and need for control kept her in a constant state of irritation. But Emily had learned not to let it affect her anymore. Every attempt at manipulation or criticism was neutralized by her patience, cunning, and composure. The entire household had grasped the new dynamic: Emily was indispensable, and Victoria could no longer control her. One evening, after dinner, Jonathan summoned Victoria and Emily to the living room. The children were already in bed. The atmosphere was solemn, but calm. Jonathan spoke. "Victoria, it's time we established clear rules for this house. Emily is doing an exceptional job. She deserves respect and trust. Any attempt to destabilize her must stop immediately." Victoria, red with anger but powerless, lowered her eyes. Jonathan had never spoken to her with such firmness. She understood that his position of absolute authority had vanished. Emily, aware of what was at stake, replied gently but confidently. "Madam, I am not trying to compete with you. My role is to protect and help children, and I will always do my best for this family. But I cannot tolerate contempt or attempts at sabotage." A heavy silence reigned for a moment. Then Victoria, realizing that none of her maneuvers could bring her back to the top, murmured, "Very well. I understand." Jonathan placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, proud and reassuring. "Thank you for being honest, courageous, and competent. You have become indispensable to this house." Emily felt a wave of relief and pride. The weeks of stress, cunning, and patience had paid off. She had earned not only the respect of Jonathan and the children, but also her dignity and her place in the house. In the days that followed, the atmosphere changed completely. Victoria, more cautious and less intrusive, ceased her attacks, while Emily continued her role with confidence and kindness. The children laughed and played without fear, and the Whitmore household regained a new harmony. Emily smiled as she watched Lucy, Ethan, and William playing in the garden. She knew the real challenge wasn't over, but now she possessed the confidence, strength, and cunning to protect what mattered most. And in the silence of twilight, under the golden rays of the setting sun, Emily understood one essential thing: sometimes, courage and silent patience are more powerful than any threat, and dignity always triumphs over arrogance.